Hello and welcome. We're going to be making this drone today, and this is the final image you will have by finishing the tutorial. Also, I'm coming out with a level 2 video where the drones fly in, kind of hover at you, and the guns will spin with some motion blur. All of the tutorial files for both level 1 and level 2 are completely for free on my website, learn-blender3d.com. So I have Blender open. And I'm actually not going to delete the cube. I'm going to left click on the light. I'm going to shift left click onto the camera, hit X and hit enter. I know, surprise, we're leaving the cube. So I'm going to left click on the cube. And the first thing we want to do is add a subdivision surface. So over where you see the wrench, I'm going to click on add modifier, and I'm going to click on subdivision surface. And I'm going to go ahead and click this viewport up to 2. If you're not familiar with the subdivision surface, it just adds more geometry and it'll curve between the points you've made. So let's just develop this further. So I'm going to tab into edit mode, and at the top left here, I'm going to left click and select faces because I just want to edit the faces. I'm going to click this first, this front face only. I'm going to hit I, and that's going to inset it. And I'm going to move my mouse down until it's fairly small, maybe to about here. And then I'm going to hit G and Y and just pull this out pretty far. Maybe let's go up here. I'm going to hit numpad 3 for you. If you don't have a numpad, see the bottom of my screen. It will tell you what you should do. Let me hit G and Y. So I'm G for move, Y to do it in the Y axis. And I'm just going to figure out how long I want this to be. I think right there looks pretty good. The next thing I want to do is I'm going to switch to Vertex Selection mode. So I'm going to click at the top left there. And I'm going to hit Z and click on wireframe. And now I'm just going to left click and drag and select. So I have all these bottom vertices selected. And at the top here, you see a little magnet. I actually don't want you to click it. I want you to click where there's that little box next to it. And this is going to be snapping to vertex. I'm going to click on vertex. So now I can hit G for move, Z to do it on the Z axis. And if you hold control, that will toggle on the snap. And if I hold my mouse over this vertex, it'll snap to that. So I'm holding control, hovering over this, and I'm going to left click. And if I tab out of edit mode, if I hit Z and then click on solid, you can see we've got the start of our shape here. And I'm just using my middle mouse to scroll around the scene, rotate around the scene. Okay, and I'm a big supporter of saving early and often, so I'm going to hold control, hit S for save. I'm going to navigate to where I'm building this scene, drone tutorial, and name it drone, hit enter to lock in that name, and enter to finish the save. Okay, and one thing I don't want, so I'm going to use my middle mouse to roll around here, rotate around. The back of this is really curved, and you may like that if that's the type of drone you're making, but I have this kind of middle section missing from the drone, so I want it to be straight there. So I'm going to tab into edit mode, and I'm going to left click and drag, and just make sure I get all 4 of these back vertices. I'm going to hit N to bring up my right panel, and then under item, if you click on item, it's this mean crease. I'm going to drag it all the way up to 1. So now if I tab out of edit mode and just use my middle mouse to kind of pan around, you can see that it's perfectly flat right there. Maybe we don't need it to be perfectly flat. Maybe if I tab in edit mode, maybe I will actually leave it a little curved. This could be a little bit of preference, but actually I am going to leave it completely at 1. Tab back out of edit mode. And also, if you right click and click on shade smooth, you will see a little bit more how it's going to look in the end. So I'm just going to middle mouse around and see how it's looking. And yeah, it looks pretty good. Go ahead and save. Okay, so I want to adjust the shape a little bit. So I've got it selected. I'm going to hit numpad 3. Actually, let me put my screencast keys on. I'm going to hit numpad 3. For you, it could just be number 3 once you've changed these settings. I'm going to tap into edit mode. Z, click wireframe, left click and drag, so I know I've got all 4 of these vertices. I'm going to hit G and Y, and I'm going to shorten this up a little bit. Actually, maybe I'm going to left click there, I'm going to hit Z and solid, G and Y, and I'm just seeing what I think about the shape here. And this really could be personal preference for you about how the drone's gonna look. But I think the longer it gets, I don't love it when it's too long. So I think I might just go something like that. I think looks pretty good. And now, so this is the front. We want the back also. So I'm gonna hit A. That will select all of these. And let me hit numpad 7 to go my top view. Hold Shift, hit D. That will duplicate. I'm gonna hit Enter just so it stays in the same spot. R for rotate. Type in 180. Hit Enter, and that will just rotate that around. I'm gonna hit G and Y. Bring it over here. Left click. And so this is gonna be the back side, and I want the back side to be a little more abrupt and shorter. So I'm gonna hit S for scale and Y just to do the scale on the Y. I'm just gonna move my mouse in until it gets to about the size I want. Again, this could be preference, but I think something like that looks good. So I'm gonna left click. G for move, Y for the Y axis. I'm gonna bring it. The design I came up with kind of has this gap in between the front and back. So I'm just gonna go ahead and put it about there. So I'm gonna left click, tab out of edit mode. I'm just gonna middle mouse around and see how I'm thinking the shape looks. And yeah, this is looking pretty good. I'm gonna go ahead and save. Okay, so I still have this selected. I'm gonna hit 1 to go into my front view. And this actually needs to move up a little bit. So I'm gonna hit G for move, Z for the Z axis. And I'm gonna bring this up to about something like here and then left click. Because there's actually gonna be a middle section we're gonna add in between the top and the bottom. So that's where it needs to be. Okay, so for this middle section, I'm gonna hold Shift, hit A, hover over mesh, and click on cube. Hit S for scale. We don't need it to be quite that large. Maybe, let's see, maybe something like this. And maybe I'm gonna left click on this top one, hit G and Z, bring it back down a bit. I don't think it needs to be as far away. So something like that's good. And then I'm gonna left click on this middle section. I'm gonna zoom in a little bit. Let's see. So I want it to have a little bit more of an interesting shape. I'm gonna tab into edit mode, hold Control R. This lets us add a loop cut. If you hover your mouse over here and left click and then left click again, we've added this cut here. I'm gonna hit Z and click on wireframe so we can see what we're doing a little bit better. I'm gonna left click and drag and get these vertices. I'm gonna hit S and X just to scale on the X axis. And I'm gonna bring these down towards each other. I just wanna make this shape a little bit more interesting than just being a straight line. So I'm gonna left click there, tab out of edit mode. And let's go ahead and add a modifier to this one too. Click Subdivision Surface. Go ahead, add this up to 2. I'm gonna tab back into edit mode, left click and drag on the top, shift left click and drag on the bottom. And let's change this mean crease all the way up to 1. Let me tab out of edit mode, hit Z and go to solid. And so now it's at least a little bit more of an interesting shape than we had before. I'm gonna right click and click on Shade Smooth, and now we have our middle section made. Go ahead and save. Okay, so we're only looking at the front, so I'm gonna use my middle mouse to scroll around and see. So yeah, look, it's only in the front here, and that's not what we want. So I'm gonna tab into edit mode, hit Z, and click on wireframe. I'm gonna left click and drag just to make sure I get all of these back vertices. I'm gonna hit numpad 3, and so I've got these back vertices, so I'm gonna hit G and Y. I'm gonna drag it out to where it should end. So I don't want it to go all the way to the end. I want it to be a little bit of a gap. And so I'm gonna left click. Something like that looks pretty good to me. And then for the front, this could be good, but I'm gonna left click and drag. I'm gonna do GY. I'm just gonna kind of see what I think if I move it further up a bit, maybe like that. And let's go ahead and hit Z solid. And I'm gonna tab out of edit mode, hold Alt A, and that will deselect everything. And I'm just gonna middle mouse around and see what I think about this. I think it looks pretty good. Let me also see, I'm gonna left click on it, maybe take this up to 3 and see how it looks. I just didn't like how it was a little sharp there. Also, I'm gonna make it 3 in the render too. So yeah, I think that's probably looking pretty good. I'm gonna hit 1 to go back into my front view. Okay, and so I want the top is exactly the same as the bottom. So what I'm gonna do is I am going to add another modifier. This one's going to be a mirror modifier. And we can click on this little eyedropper and click on this object so we know we're going to mirror using that object. And now we just need to select the correct axis. So we only need Z. We just are mirroring this on the Z. So yeah, this modifier just will kind of add this to the bottom now that we've set it up properly. But I'm thinking this gap is too big. So I'm going to hit G and Z. And so when I move this in, it'll also move in that bottom one. And again, this is a little bit of preference. You could have your drone, look like that. I want it to be a bit closer. I think something like this is good. So I'm gonna left click. And I'm just gonna middle mouse around, zoom out a little bit. I'm just, starting to see, do I like the shape of this? Do I want to make any adjustments to the shape? But I think that's looking pretty good. So I'm gonna go ahead and save. And actually, while we're at it, I want to add more. We still have this selected. I want to open up this subdivision surface, and I'm just going to scroll in a little bit. You see here, it's a little jagged. I'm going to click up this viewport to 3, maybe even up to 4, and then make the render also that high. Middle mouse around. That adds more geometry to your scene, and depending on your computer, it could start to struggle. But our scene's pretty basic, so that should be all right for you. But if you are noticing some performance issues, you can take this down to 3, and even 2 will still look pretty good. But I'm going to take mine up to 4. I'm just middle mousing around just so it's really smooth and you don't have any of that jagged areas going on. And since we're going to see this drone pretty close up, I do want to lean towards higher quality. Okay, let's start working on the wings. So I'm going to hold Shift, hit A, hover over a mesh, and I'm going to actually make it with a UV sphere. And then the bottom left here, I can expand this open. I'm just going to make the segment 16 and the rings 8, hit enter, and I'm just going to close that back up. Now I'm going to hit 7 or numpad 7 to go to my top view, scroll out a little bit, I'm going to hit G, and I'm going to bring it over here and left click. And I want it to be kind of about this wide at its widest point. So I'm going to hit S for scale and then Y to do it on the Y axis. And I'm just going to bring it down to, again, and this is kind of preference, but at its widest point, this is actually going to be pretty thin. So I'm thinking I want something like maybe about here will be good, left click. And I want it to be a little further over. So I'm going to hit G and X and move this over maybe to about here and left click. And let's go real quick. Let's left click on this. I'm going to go ahead and double click in the outliner here and name this drone body. And I'm going to left click on this thing, name it, double click there, do drone middle. And just to have a little bit of organization. And now I'm going to click on the eyes to hide them. I'm going to left click on the wing that we're working on. I'm going to hit numpad 3 to go into my side view. And let's tab into edit mode. I'm going to switch to my face selection mode, zoom in a little bit with my middle mouse, and then shift middle mouse to get in the center here. And I just want to select, so I'm left clicking on this face, shift left clicking, and I want to get all of these faces. So here's the middle. I've got these 4 faces above it, these 4 faces below it. You could even get these 2, but this is gonna should look pretty good. So I'm gonna hit numpad 1 to go my front view, do E to extrude, just bring that out, left click. I'm gonna hit S for scale, X, and then 0, and hit enter. And that's just gonna straighten them all out on this axis. Now I'm gonna hit S for scale, Z, and I'm just gonna bring it down like so. E to extrude again, left click, S for scale, Z, and I just kind of want it to curve in maybe about so. Extrude one more time, left click, and this time I'm going to S, Z, and maybe bring it back out a little bit and get it to have a curve that goes down and back up. So I'm going to tab back into object mode, shift middle mouse to move over a little bit. So it's still kind of boring looking. Let's go ahead and add a modifier. Let's add a subdivision surface, and let's take it up to 2. I think should be good. Maybe let's see 3. Yeah, I'll use 3. 2 probably would get the job done. But let me right click on this and click on Shade Smooth. I want to tab in the edit mode. And for the moment, over at the modifier, I'm going to click on this little icon here. It will turn it off so we don't see the modifier in edit mode. And I'm going to switch to my line selection mode here. I'm gonna left click here, shift left click, shift left click, shift left click. I want this whole area here. And in this right panel, if you are under item, I'm going to take the mean crease all the way to up, all the way to 1. And if I turn this modifier back on, you can kind of see it's made this a little bit more of a hard edge. I think it just adds a little bit to the scene. And I'm actually going to go ahead and do that for this one too. So I left click, shift left click, and I'm going to go ahead and get all of these. And let's go ahead and turn this mean crease all the way up also. And let's tab out of edit mode and see how it looks. I'll middle mouse around. And yeah, I think that's just going to add a little visual interest. It catches the light in kind of a unique way. So I think that's going to be pretty cool. I'm going to go ahead and save. Okay, so I want to add a little bit more shape to this though. So I'm going to hit 1 or numpad 1 to go to my front view, tab in the edit mode. And then I'm going to switch it also to Vertex Selection. And so I'm going to left click on this little vertex right here, and then I'm going to go all the way to the bottom where it's got the exact same one down here. I'm going to shift left click and get that one. And so if I hit S and Z, you can see I'm pulling out those points, but I'm going to hit escape on that, so we don't want that. I want to enable proportional editing. So if you hit O, now when you hit S for scale and Z, you'll see there's this circle. And this circle shows you how much influence you're having on other vertices nearby. So if you scroll your middle mouse up, it'll affect a lot of vertices that fall within it. If you scroll it down, it'll affect less. So I want to have, I want it to kind of jolt out right here, but I don't want it to happen in a really, I want it to be smooth. I don't want it to be too abrupt. So I'm going to do something maybe like that, and then left click. I think that's pretty good. And I also want to left click on this one over here, this vertice, and hit G and X and move this over. And again, this is a little bit of preference. You know, you maybe think this looks pretty cool. I want it to be more smooth though. I'm actually going to escape and zoom out a little bit though to give myself more space. G, X, pull it over, and I'm going to increase my scroll wheel so it gets more of these vertices so I can really smooth this out. I'm going to left click there and then tab out of edit mode. I'm just going to middle mouse around and see if I think I'm happy with the shape here. And yeah, I think that looks pretty cool. I think it should be pretty interesting. I'm going to go ahead and save again. Okay, so let's go ahead and turn these eyes back on so we can see how it looks all together. And I'm going to hit 1 to go into my front view and shift middle mouse and zoom out a little bit just so I can see, you know, how this is really looking. So it's pretty good, but I think it's too far over. So I'm going to hit G and X and bring it over here. If I go too far, you can see we're coming out the other side, and we don't want that. But I want to get to the right shape. I think I had something like, maybe something like this in the first go around. So that's pretty good, but we don't want sticking out there. So let's tab in the edit mode. I'm going to hold Alt A, make sure I deselect everything. And one thing with proportional editing is you forget that you leave it on. So I can see here it's still on. I actually want to hit O and make sure I remember to turn that off. And also to make things easier, I'm going to turn off those eyeballs, middle mouse around, and I'm going to switch to face selection, and I'm going to right click or left click and then shift left click to get all of these faces. I'm going to hit 1 to go into my front view or numpad 1, turn these icons back on. I'm going to hit G and X, and I'm just going to move it over until it's intersecting here but not going all the way through. Tab out of edit mode. And we also want this wing on the other side. So let's go ahead and go add a modifier, mirror, use our little eyedropper and click on that centerpiece. And I'm going to hold Alt, hit A to deselect, and see what we think about this. So I think it's looking pretty good. I think it's pretty close to what I had before. I'm going to middle mouse around and zoom out and just I'm just taking a look to see if I think I'm happy with the shape we've got going here. And yeah, I think that's looking pretty good, so I'm gonna go ahead and save. Alright, so I'm a little tired of looking at it all boring like this, so I'm going to start adding materials, and first we need to UV unwrap. So in this top area here, I'm going to click on UV editing, and if you're not familiar with UV editing, basically we're going to take two-dimensional image textures and put them onto a 3D object. So to make that actually work properly, you have to unwrap it. It looks like I had this still selected, so with my mouse over here, I'm going to tab out of that edit mode. And I'm going to left click on this main body. I'm going to hit 1 or numpad 1 to go to my front view and zoom in a little bit. This course isn't really about UV editing, so I'm going to do kind of the quick and dirty way. You should definitely learn how to UV edit it properly, and you'll get better results, but this will turn out pretty good. So I'm going to tab into edit mode. I'm going to hit A just to make sure everything's selected here. I'm going to hit U for unwrap, and I'm going to use Smart UV Project. And it's kind of gonna, and then you have to click OK. It's kind of gonna automatically do its best to unwrap this for us. One thing I want to do though, in this left panel, I'm gonna click on New, and under Blank, I'm gonna click on UV Grid and click on OK. I'm gonna scroll out a little bit there, and then in this right panel, I'm gonna tab out of Edit Mode, go down to the Material Properties, and to the right of the base color, there's a little button. I'm gonna click on that. Click on Image Texture, click on this little icon here, and click on that Untitled. And we're not seeing anything right now because we need to hit Z and go to Material Preview. So if I zoom in, you can see how this has been unwrapped, and I'm gonna middle mouse around so you can see it. And you can see it's not perfect. There's these seams here. That's why you should learn about UV unwrapping. But honestly, it actually works out pretty well for the look of this, so it's actually going to work fine for us. I was happy with the results even with this, but just know you could take this further and mark some seams and get better results. I'm going to left click on this side, the wings. I'm going to hit 1 to go into my front view. I'm going to shift middle mouse click over. And so for this one, we're going to tab into edit mode, and actually before we do that, we can still be in edit mode, but I'm going to click this little eyedropper, click on the material, just to show you I want to have the same UV, just so we can preview how this unwrap is going. And so right now you can see that it's kind of horrible over here. So if I hit A to select everything, then U, this time we're going to do Project from View. I'll click on that. And one thing to note, if I zoom out really far and I hit U, Project from View, that actually will change the size and the scale. So you want to be about the same zoom level I was. Hit U, Project from View, and maybe actually I'm going to zoom in a little bit more. Shift middle mouse over, hit U, Project from View. I just want these squares to be about the same size as over here, so that kind of the scale matches up better. So I'm going to tab out of edit mode, and just to show you real quick, if I middle mouse around, Project from View, it actually did a really good job with this front faces, but you can see at the top, it's just not quite right. But we're really just going to see this model from the front, and when we add in the actual texture, it'll help hide that better. So really, this actually is going to be pretty good for us, and we can go ahead and actually add in our real materials. But I'm going to go ahead and save. Okay, so now I'm going to go to the Shading tab, and I'm going to click and drag this to give myself some more space here on the bottom. I'm going to left click into the empty space because those were all selected by default. I'm going to left click, so this is the image texture. I'm going to hit G and move this over. I'm going to need some more space. And so right now it's just got this untitled image that's really just this UV grid. So I'm going to click on the folder icon, double click on assets, double click on metal, and then you want to double click on this metal color. So if I zoom in on this top, middle mouse, and then shift middle mouse, you can see we've got this image texture applied. It's not that exciting yet, but let's keep going. So I'm going to take this metallic value all the way to 1, and then I'm going to left click on this image texture, hold shift, hit D. I'm going to duplicate it, bring it down. I'm going to left click on the folder, and this time I'm going to double click on roughness. I'm going to left click and drag from the color into the roughness and let go. I do want to change the color space from sRGB to non-color. And then I'm going to left click on this guy again, Shift D one more time, bring this down, Shift middle mouse to move down. This time I want to click on the folder icon and we want the normal. And I'm going to click and drag the color into the normal. It's not going to look good, but if we hit Shift, hold Shift, hit A, click on the search and start typing in normal, and we want this normal map. If you hover over this line and left click, it'll add that normal map. If you're not familiar with normal maps, just look them up, but it kind of gives you some fake extra detail in your scene. I'm going to click in there from the 1 and make it a 5 and hit enter. And let's see. Oh, it looks like the color space got changed. So change the sRGB to non-color. And now if I pull this down and zoom in, you can see it's actually starting to look pretty good, but we're not done, so let's keep tweaking it. Okay, so let's see. So right now it's just kind of just like, this gray, and that's not really what I want. So I'm gonna click and drag here to give myself some more space again. Shift middle mouse to pan over. I'm gonna scroll in a little bit. So this is what's driving the actual color of it. So I'm gonna hold Shift, hit A, click on search, and type in hue. Hit enter, hover over here and left click. So now this will allow us to actually change the color of this. So if you see, if I start dragging this around, it's kind of subtle, but actually let me go ahead and click the saturation and type in 10. Normally you don't want to go this drastic, but I decided it actually worked for this scene. So if I click through here, you'll see this color change, and really you could use any color you want. But I'm gonna go ahead and go with 0.9. It's gonna give us this nice red, and then value is just how bright and dark things are. So I'm gonna click in there and make it 0.1. So it's actually pretty dark, but I think it's looking pretty good. So normally this is kind of what you do, but I noticed in my scene, I didn't love the final result. When we actually add our world in, this is just really reflective. So I'm gonna do something that I wouldn't normally advise you to do, but I'm gonna tweak the settings a little bit here. I'm gonna go to the subsurf. I'm gonna click in here and do 0.4, and then under the color, I'm gonna click on that white spot, then click the eyedropper, and I'm gonna go over to where someone's kind of red and then left click. You can see we kind of got that color here. And then for the specular, I'm just gonna bring this down, and so you can see them down. I'm gonna zoom in at the top, Shift middle mouse click, and if I pull the specular higher and lower, you can see how this is changing. If you go too far down, it's gonna be dull and kind of boring. Let me see, I think I had 0.13 at one point, but I think that's gonna be too dull. 0.5 was the value it was at, so let me go down to like 0.3, and I think that's gonna look pretty good. So I'm gonna zoom out and hold Alt, hit A just to deselect things. And you know what, let's actually just go back to layout. I'm gonna click on layout, then I'm gonna hit Z, click on material preview, just so I can kind of scroll around and see if I'm happy with this. And yeah, I think it's looking pretty good. Okay, and one thing I want to do too is I don't think I changed the EV settings. So in this little camera icon, I'm just go ahead and enable some settings that are going to make things look better. So I'm going to turn on ambient occlusion that has kind of shadows in between crease areas. I'm going to left click the screen space reflections, open that up. Let's include refraction. I don't know if we'll actually have that in our scene. I'm going to turn off the half race trace. I'm going to close that one down, open up shadows, and also just enable high bit depth shadows. And that will just make things look a little bit better in the scene. And then also let's left click on this middle section and go over to material properties, hit new, and let's go ahead and actually, you know what? Under principled shader, this time we're just going to use an emission. So click on there and click on emission. That's just going to emit light. We'll change the strength up to 10, hit enter. And if I zoom in a little bit, you can see now we're getting some reflections here. I'm going to change the color from white to maybe like a blue. This is really can be some preference, but I think something like that will be pretty good. I'm going to zoom out, hold Alt A to deselect, and then I'm going to go back to this camera icon. I'm going to click on bloom. And you can see here, if I turn on and off, it's really glowing now. So bloom will add a glow to anything that's really bright in your scene, and you can adjust things here. Like, so, you know, the radius will be like how far that glow extends out. And I think it was too far before. So I'm going to put something like here. We may tweak this later when we get closer to the final scene. But I just wanted to get, you know, our scene looking a little bit more pretty and interesting. So I think that's looking pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and save. Okay, let's continue adding more elements to our scene. So I'm going to hold Shift, hit A, hover over mesh, and I'm going to use a UV sphere again. And let's hit 7 to go to my top view, scroll out. I'm going to hit G and Y to move it just on the Y, left click. So I got this kind of camera on the front. So hit S for scale, and it's kind of hard to see how big it's going to be, but something like that will probably be pretty good. Let's hit 1 or numpad 1 to go to the front view. Hit G and Z to do it, to move just on the Z axis. And I'm going to left click there. I'm going to zoom in a bit, middle mouse, and then shift middle mouse. I'm just trying to see, you know, how big it's going to be. And maybe I'll hit S for scale and bring it back up a bit. Something like that. And you can also, again, GZ, you can play with how far it's sticking out. I'm going to hit escape because I think I liked where it was. That's pretty good. Let's right click and hit shade smooth on it. I'm going to hold Alt, hit A, zoom out. I'm just going to middle mouse around again. I'm just trying to see if I'm happy with the size of it. That's pretty good. We may tweak it a little bit as we go, but that's pretty good. I also want the camera on the bottom. I thought it looked kind of cool to have both. So I'm going to left click on it again, go under the wrench, add modifier, mirror modifier, click on the little eyedropper, click there. Let's see, I think we just want the Z, so I'm going to turn off it on the X. We only need it on the Z. Hold Alt, hit A. And again, I'm just kind of previewing how it looks. And yeah, I think that's going to be pretty good. Okay, since I've kind of got myself going on texturing things, let's keep going on that. So I'm going to left click on the sphere. I'm going to click on shading. I'm going to middle mouse to zoom in, and then shift middle mouse. And then in the right panel, I'm going to click on the material properties, click new. I've kind of been showing you bad habits. I should click in here and type in glass and hit enter to name it. And this time we're going to use, instead of principled, let's go ahead and use a glass shader. And let's see, I am going to change the IOR to 0.65 and hit enter. And let's see. Oh, and so those EV settings I showed you before, if I go back into this icon, you do need to have refraction checked, so make sure you do. Go back to the material tabs. EV, just to have like transparent things, you have to make sure your settings are right. So under settings, you need to have screen space refraction for that object also. And then you have to change the refraction depth also. So I'm going to put it at 0.1. I'm going to middle mouse around and zoom out. This isn't exactly how I want it yet. If I move the roughness, you can kind of see how it looks. And you could play with this IOR value a bit. I kind of wanted it to look like it's kind of got one of those black balls in the center. So 0.65 worked for me. And as for right now, let's just put the roughness maybe somewhere around like 0.2, but we're going to continue working on that. I'm just going to zoom out, hold Alt, hit A, and yeah, I think that is looking pretty good. I'm going to hit save. Let's take this a little bit further though. So I'm going to zoom back in and then shift middle mouse. So it looks, perfectly clean. And since our drone's kind of beat up, that doesn't really make sense. So I'm going to left click, make sure I have that selected. And I'm going to hold shift today with your mouse on the bottom, hold shift, hit A. I'm going to click in search and type in image. I'm going to left click. And I'm going to click on the little icon. I'm looking for that roughness value. And so I'm going to take the color and put it into the roughness here. And so if I zoom in, it's kind of hard to see, but there are these little scratch and nicks. So I'm going to hit left click on this, hit G to move it over. I'm going to tweak this a little bit further. So I'm going to hold shift, hit A, click on the search and type in color ramp, hit enter, hover over that and left click. This will just let us make things either more or less rough here by adjusting those values. So I'm actually going to left click on this white value and then click on the white down here, and I'm going to bring this down. And if you see, if I bring it all the way to black, so we're not seeing much of a change yet, but I'm going to put it maybe to about here, and then left click. And if you left click and drag, you can bring this over Why aren't we seeing much of a change though? Oh, okay, we are seeing a change. I just wasn't getting it close enough. So I'm gonna bring it over, maybe something, let's see, maybe something over here. And also let's just see what happens if I move the black over. So the black is just gonna make it really reflective. Maybe I'll move that over a teeny bit, but then let's left click and drag this one back over. And yeah, so it's like, you know, it's just kind of dirtying up this glass. It is making it a little bit too cloudy maybe, so I'm gonna pull it back a bit. And so you can see if this is all the way over, bringing it maybe to about here, zoom out, hold Alt, hit A. And yeah, I think that's looking pretty good. But again, you can play with those values. If you play with how bright or dark it is, you'll get different results. But I think that's good for now. We could tweak it later if we think it need to be changed. Okay, so I'm gonna click on the Layout tab, and let's go ahead and keep adding things. So I'm gonna hit 1 or numpad 1 to go my front view. Hold Shift, hit A, hover over Mesh. I just want to add in a basic cylinder. And I'm going to hit RX90, hit Enter. So we just rotated it 90 degrees on the X-axis. I'm going to hit G and move it over here. I'm going to zoom in, middle mouse, Shift middle mouse. S for scale, bring it down. And let's see, I kind of want to look at my reference real quick to see how big these should be. All right, so I'll hit G, move it up. Oh, and I kind of had it on the inside here before. Yeah, let's go ahead and do that same thing. I'm gonna middle mouse around. You can see it's not actually going through. So I'm gonna hit numpad 7 to go my top view. G and Y. I'm just gonna pull it until it actually is intersecting here. Now I'm gonna go back and hit numpad 1 to go my front view. And actually, you know what? I'm gonna hit 7, go back. I don't want it to intersect too much. So I'm gonna hit G and Y and get it just where both sides are going through it. I'm gonna hit 1 to my front view. Oh, so it's actually not good enough because this object is curved. So I'm gonna hit G and Y and move it until you can see the whole thing there. Go to the materials. I'm gonna left click here and select this material. Maybe I'll actually rename this Glow Blue to try to show you good habits here. And then I'm gonna duplicate that by clicking that little icon there. I'm gonna click in here, name this blue or Glow Red. Change the color to a red. Let's see, maybe a little bit like that looks good. Zoom out a little bit. I'm gonna tap in edit mode. I want this to be the same object. I'm gonna hit A just to be sure everything's selected. I'm gonna hit Shift D, hold Shift, hit D, and then Z. And I'm just gonna bring this down until it's at a similar position down here. I think that looks pretty good. And so that one's still selected. So I'm gonna hold Shift, hit D. I'm gonna bring one more, and I'm gonna bring it all the way over here. I'm gonna hit S for scale to make it smaller, maybe about so. Hit G and move it over a bit, make sure it's kind of centered. And let's see, we need to have a second material here, so I'm gonna hit this plus arrow, and I'm gonna click on the blue for now, and then click on the sign. So since it's actually selected in edit mode, then you hit a sign, and that's how you get that one there. But I want this one to be kind of a yellow, so I'm gonna duplicate this again. This time go in and rename it yellow. Hit enter. And I'm gonna change that color to a yellow. Tab out of edit mode, hold Alt, hit A to deselect, and zoom out. I'm just gonna kind of middle mouse around and make sure that things make sense here. I'm gonna zoom in. So this is intersecting well. You just kind of make sure it is intersecting some way that looks good. You could have made this like a sphere, you could have made this anything, but from the camera's perspective, you're really not going to see that any well. It's really just kind of like a glowing light, so I wasn't too concerned with how it looked. But now we want it on the other side also. So I'm going to left click on this, and remember, since we added these in edit mode, they're all one object. So I'm going to click on the wrench icon, click add modifier, mirror, click on our little eyedropper and select that middle section. Hold Alt, hit A, and you can see we've got all of our little lights added. So it's looking pretty good. Yeah, I like it. Okay, so now we need our little base for our kind of gun turret. So I'm gonna hit 1 or numpad 1 to go to my front view. Hold shift, hit A, hover over mesh, click on cylinder again. And again, we're gonna hit R for rotate, X, 90, and hit enter. And let me zoom in a little bit, shift middle mouse. I'm gonna hit G for move, X on the X axis, kind of get it in the center here, and then left click. S for scale, bring this in, maybe something about, let's see, maybe bigger even, maybe something about that will be good. And let's see, I'm gonna middle mouse around, hit G and Y to make sure it's actually going through our object. We don't want to stick out the other side, so I'm gonna left click. Let's hit S for scale and then Y. Just make this a lot smaller. And then G and Y. And I just wanna make sure it's sticking all the way out. Maybe something about here. Something like this will be good. All right. So I still have this selected. I'm gonna tab into edit mode. And I'm gonna left click on, let's go to the vertices. I'll hold Alt, hit A to deselect everything, and then hold Alt Shift, and then left click in between these points, and you should get that whole edge loop there. If you click the wrong spot, you might get a different loop. Just you can always deselect and reselect to get the correct one. I'm gonna hold Control, hit B, and that's gonna add a bevel, which will curve this for us. I'm gonna bring it down. So you change how far this bevel is gonna go. I'm gonna maybe put it something like this. And if you scroll up your middle mouse, it'll add more or less cuts. So I'm gonna go something maybe about here, and then left click. I'm gonna hold Alt, hit A to deselect everything, and then hold Alt Shift. I'm gonna left click to get this center face here, and I'm gonna hit E to extrude. I'm gonna bring that back down until you don't want to go through it here, but just where you're past where it's fully visible, and then left click. And I'm gonna tab out of edit mode and kind of take a quick look at how this looks. All right, I'm gonna tab back into edit mode. With this still selected, I'm gonna hit I, and that will inset it. And so that just lets us have a circle in the middle here. Go somewhere maybe about here. I'm gonna middle mouse around so it can be on the side a little bit. I'm gonna hit E for extrude, and I'm gonna pull it where it's not exactly flush to the furthest point there, somewhere in between. So maybe something like that will be good. Left click, and I'm gonna tab out of edit mode, middle mouse around just to see how it's looking, and that looks pretty good. Alright, so let's go ahead, and we have the wrench selected already. Let's go in and add a subdivision surface, and let's change it up to 2. I'm going to zoom in, shift middle mouse, just make sure I'm happy with how it's looking. I'm also going to right click and click on shade smooth. Okay, so it looks pretty good. I'm going to tab into edit mode. With that, this should still be selected for you. I'm going to take the mean crease in this case all the way up to 1, and then tab out of edit mode. I kind of want it to just be like a sharp edge there, and yeah, that looks pretty good. So now we need to texture this one also, so let's go over to, let's see, the UV editing first. That's already selected. Hit 1 to go to my front view, zoom in a bit, shift middle mouse over. Let's see, I'm gonna hit A to select everything. Let's do U, and this time let's try out a cylinder projection. And if I go ahead and click back in here, I guess we don't have our UV anymore, but let's click on this material, tab out of edit mode, and then middle mouse around C. Just see if it makes sense. So there is kind of an issue there that might not look the best. It is gonna be kind of hard to see this from the camera, but it's not so bad. Let me hit 1 to go my front view, zoom out. I'm gonna tab into edit mode, hit A, let's do U. This time let's try Smart UV Project. I'm gonna tab out of edit mode. Yeah, maybe we're getting better results with that. Either would work. It's, like I said, it's pretty far from the camera. You're not gonna see it too well. We are getting a little bit of an issue here. I'm gonna tab into edit mode. This is still selected. Actually, we have everything selected. So let me If you click here to get the face select and just left click to get here, I'm gonna hit I and just bring this like all the way in. We're having a little bit of an issue where all these vertices are going right here, and you can kind of see it. I'm gonna tab out of edit mode, and so you can kind of see it here, but it's really gonna be hard for anyone to see. So I'm gonna zoom out, and let's actually go back to layout, hold Alt, hit A to deselect. I'm just kind of again seeing if I think this looks good and makes sense. And yeah, it's looking pretty good. So let's go ahead and mirror it. So click on it, go to mirror, click on our little guy, click on our middle section, Alt A, and yeah, we've got that on both sides. So we're almost done. Okay, so the last element we need for the actual drone itself is the actual little guns. So I'm gonna hit numpad 1 to go to my front view, hold shift, hit A, add in a cylinder. We're doing a lot of these. R, X, 90, hit enter. I'm gonna do G and X just to keep it right on the axis here. Zoom in, S for scale. And so there's gonna be 3 of these. So I'm gonna hit G, kind of position this here and see. So there's gonna be 3. It could be a little bit bigger. So I'm gonna hit S, bring it out, hit G. I think something like that will be good. But actually, I'm gonna go back a little further. I'm gonna hit S, make it a little bit smaller. Something like that should be good. Middle mouse around. G and Y, get it to where it's actually intersecting here. And I'm gonna actually take it where it's barely sticking out. Actually, you know what? Let's go to about here. I think will be pretty good, sticking out about that much. Middle mouse around. And so I'm just going to start playing with this to make the shape a little bit more unique and interesting. So I'm going to tab into edit mode. I'm going to left click just to have this face selected. I'm going to hit I to inset it, go about there. I'm going to hit E for extrude, left click, and we're just going to do this a few times. I'm going to hit I to inset it, E to extrude out a little bit. I'm going to zoom in even closer. And this time I'm going to, let's see, this time I'm gonna hit E for extrude, and then S for scale, bring it out to a similar distance, E for extrude, bring it over a bit. I'm gonna I inset it, and you could be pretty particular and try to get exact, but again, it's pretty far away, so don't worry about too much. E for extrude. I'm going to E and then S, bring it out, try to get to a similar distance. E for extrude. Let's see, I think maybe I did one more of these. So it's I, bring it in, E for extrude, then do an ES, bring it out. And now I'm going to zoom out and extrude this much further. Maybe, let's see, something like there. I'm going to zoom out a little bit, just trying to see how long it is compared to the rest of the drone. I think that's pretty good. I'm going to zoom back in. I'm just going to do a couple more for some more visual interest. So I'm going to do I, bring this in, left click, E for extrude. I'm going to bring it out further this time, something like that. I, left click, E for extrude. And let's see, one more time I think. I, left click, E for extrude, bring it maybe about here. I, bring it here, and this time I'm gonna hit E and bring it back so it looks like, so there's actually a gap there and the shadows will go in there. So I'm gonna pull that back, middle mouse around, tab out of edit mode, and yeah, I think that's looking pretty good for our gun. Okay, so I'm going to zoom back in on it, shift middle mouse over. I'm going to right click and click on shade smooth. This time we're going to do one more step here. We're going to click on this little icon here, object data properties, normals, and then auto smooth. And so that will make it smooth, but then it'll also make the areas that should be sharp, sharp. So that's pretty good there. Did I already right click and click shade smooth? Yeah, okay. So what else do we need to do? We need to hit 1 to go into our front view. I'm going to tab into edit mode, A to select all of this, hold shift D, that's just going to duplicate. I'm going to put this other one down near the bottom here. hold Shift D. This one I'm going to click X to keep it on the same axis, and then left click. Tab out of edit mode. Okay, we got 3 guns going. What else do we need to do? So we need to add the material. Okay, so let's click on the shading tab, and in this right panel I'm going to click new. This time I'm going to name it gun, hit enter, and let's see, so shift middle mouse. I'm going to make the metallic all the way up to 1. I'm going to rotate around and zoom in again so I can see what I'm doing. See the metallic all the way up to 1. It's a little boring looking right now though, so also I'm going to change the base color from pure white to a bit of a darker, not like a dark gray, but maybe something like that. Maybe it's a little darker than I want. I'm going to bring it up a little bit. And then let's make it visually more interesting with, well, first actually we should unwrap this. So I'm going to hit 1 to go to my front view, tab into edit mode, hit A, and this time I'm going to hit U, and let's do the cylinder projection. I'll tab out of edit mode, middle mouse around. We won't see anything yet, but now I'm going to hold my mouse on the bottom, Shift A, type in image texture. I'm going to click on this. I want the roughness again, and it's got non-color already. That's good. I'm going to left click and drag this into the roughness. And you can kind of barely see, it's hard to see, but if I hold Shift, hit A, I'm going to type in brightness this time. Once you click the search, I'm going to put it in between those there. And I'm just going to take this brightness, let's see, I'm going to put it up to 0.4, and I'm going to go into contrast and go to 0.8. And that's just going to add a little bit more visual interest here. I had this as sRGB in my first go around. Let's see if that looks better. No, go back to non-color data. And also too, if you want to, you can left click on this, hit M, and you'll see how it is before and after to turn it off and turn it on. And let's see, maybe I'll play with this some more. So you definitely want it reflective, but you don't want too reflective. Yeah, so 0.4 is pretty good. And then yeah, I think I had a pretty good value for the contrast. So I'm going to type in 0.8, hit enter. And let's go back to the layout tab. I'm going to hold Alt, hit A, zoom out, just see what I think about how it looks. Zoom out a bit, zoom back in. I'm just seeing it at different angles, see if I'm happy with how it looks. And yeah, it looks pretty good. So mirror it like we've been doing. So select it, go to the wrenches, add modifier mirror, click on the dropper, click on that center, Alt A to deselect. And yeah, I think we have a pretty nice drone going. I think it's looking pretty good. Okay, so let's actually add in, so we've been in this material preview. If I hit Z and click on rendered, the scene get a little bit more boring, but we need to actually add in our world, our HDRI. So if you click on the world, under color, click on that little icon, and then click on environment texture. Click on open, go into assets, and double click on this HDR right here. And now you can actually see we have this scene going on. So you can actually see how it's going to look with this in the background. So now we just need to set up our camera. Okay, I'm going to hold Shift, hit A, click on camera. I'm going to hit 7 to go my top view, zoom out a bit. Where is our camera actually? I'm going to hit G. Oh, it's just really small. G and then Y to bring it over here. I'm going to hit S to scale it, make it a lot bigger. And in the right panel here, let's see, let's change this to 90. The Y, let's put to 0, and the Z to 0. And so now if I hit 0 on the number pad, you are seeing what the camera is seeing. And let's see. So let's, since we're having this, if you follow along for the part 2, this will be animated, but I just want to give you a cool final render from this scene. So let's click on the camera icon, click on depth of field, and if you click on the little eyedropper, you can put what's the center of your depth of field. So I'm going to click in there, and now if you pull this value down, you'll see you're adding blur to the scene. But if you go too far, you start blurring the drone a lot. So let's zoom in a bit and see what a good value might be. I kind of do like it a little bit too far, even though it's blurring out the drone. But let's see, maybe something, let's start with 2, And also you can just turn this on and off just to see what's happening a little more clearly. Let's go down to 1. And we are getting a little bit of blur on the drone, but I think that looks cooler. I think it's more interesting like this. And then one thing we can do too is if you click on view, you can click on this lock camera to view button. And now if you move around the viewport, it also moves your camera. So I'm gonna middle mouse click to move around. I just wanna have a little bit more of an interesting angle. I thought it was a little boring, the angle we had. I might even try to, let's see, I'm gonna go to item and let's take this Y. Let's maybe like rotate this around a bit just to give it a little bit more of an interesting little look to it. I do want the drone kind of looking at me. Maybe something like this. You're really just trying to get an interesting, you know, image. You also can hold control and middle mouse to kind of zoom in or out here. So I'm gonna get, so I really want to fill the frame. That's pretty good. I'm gonna shift middle mouse and move it over. I also want to hit N. I'm just gonna hide that panel so I can really see what I'm doing here. And yeah, I think that looks pretty good. All right, and you can go into this little printer icon and change. If you want to make it even bigger, you can, but really we're just ready to render. I'll click render, render image, and just wait a second, and there you go. You've got your final render. Feel free to tweak it as you want, but I think it's looking pretty good. Oh, I almost forgot. The guns look way better if you add a bevel. So I'm gonna left click on the guns, go into the modifiers, add modifier bevel. And I'm just going to change the segment to 2, and I'm going to hold Alt hit A just to deselect. And if I turn it off and on, you can see it does look a lot more interesting with that bevel. And then now you're ready to just render and you're good. I hope that you enjoyed making this tutorial, and if you did, feel free to check out the level 2 tutorial. And please like and subscribe. It really does motivate me to keep making more tutorials. All right, thanks for watching.